Hey again, everybody. Recently in one of these videos where I was able to share with you, we talked about the idea of pursuing aggressively this idea of stillness and quiet in life. We spent some time together in Psalm chapter 131, and ultimately we said a couple of things in that video. We said that stillness was the hard work of the soul, that we have to work hard and be disciplined to fight for and to find that secret place, a quiet place where we can be alone with God. But I wanted to share another part of Psalm 131 because there's an area of it that we left out, and I wanted to follow up in kind of a part two, if you will. So let's read together again Psalm chapter 131. Lord, my heart is not proud, my eyes are not haughty. I do not get involved with things too great or too wondrous for me. Instead, I have calmed and quieted my soul like a weaned child with its mother. My soul is like a weaned child. Israel, put your hope in the Lord, both now and forever. One of the things that will destroy your quieted soul, that will destroy your peace and that quiet, secret place with God, one of the things that will destroy it is what David discovers and tells us about in Psalm chapter 131. He says, I don't waste time on things too wondrous, too grand for me, things too far beyond my imagination. David didn't get himself caught up in things too great for himself. He didn't focus on the next study, the next education. He didn't focus on speculations and conspiracies and how to always become the next greatest thing. He didn't go into his role as king trying to seek how to become Israel's greatest king, the one by which all kings would be measured. No, David approached his life differently. He approached it with God's word as his meditation. He approached his shepherding as the role and the position that God had given him, and he was faithful and he was obedient in that role, taking care of the sheep. As king, he made some really big mistakes, but he chose to simply focus on what God was asking of him. As king, he was in a position where he could have demanded so much for himself, a position where he could have used his influence to try to gain more popularity, to always drive into the next thing and try to give himself more fame, more clout, more exposure to the world so that everybody would know who he was. And yet that was not his desire. That wasn't the way he lived out his life. He says, I don't spend time in these things too lofty for me, these things beyond me. I just don't waste time there. He says, my hope is in God. That's it. His eyes, he says, and heart were not proud or arrogant. He didn't look down on other people as if they should look at him a certain kind of way. He didn't view his role as king as the place to be. I don't get caught up in these lofty things. My hope is in the Lord. David simply chose not to allow himself to get swept up in it. We live in a very noisy world. It's constantly vying for your attention. It's so easy to get swept up in the next thing. Easy to get swept up in the worldview that it's all about you, that you need to just get to the next thing and get to the next level and be promoted, and people need to see you, and people need to know your social media, and you need clout, and you should press into the next thing, and oh, there's this speculation and this conspiracy and this and this and all of these things that are out there vying for your attention. The world is a noisy place, and if the world had its way, you would be completely focused on it, on those lofty things, getting to the next place, having the next deal, always pushing and not just stopping and saying, God, what is it you have for me right now in this moment, in the role that I am currently in? The world would have you focus on the lower story, to consider success, what the world calls success. God would not. God would have you view success as faithful obedience right where you are. If you find yourself in life really caught up in the next thing all the time, And it's always this grandeur, and how do you get more, and how do you gain more, and it's all about you, and you're kind of the star of your own movie, and everybody revolves around you, and you're trying to get to these lofty things all the time. Those things will drown out your quiet and your stillness with God. It will become nearly impossible for you in that quiet, secret place to hear the voice of God when He whispers to you, be faithful, be obedient, just do what I'm asking you to do right now. You see, we really have two choices in this life. We can focus and pursue one of two stories. We can pursue the upper story, or we can pursue the lower story. The way Jesus says it in the New Testament, He says you can't serve two masters. You can only serve one. You can't serve God and money. You can't serve God and the next thing it is that you're aiming for. Only one of those things can be the God in your life. We can choose to pursue God in the quiet, to hear His voice in the secret place, or we can pursue the lower story, the things the world says we need, the things the world says we have to have, the education that we have to have, the promotion that we have to have, the family that we have to have. And you can get caught up in all the lofty things the world has to offer, and if you're not careful, it will drown out the voice of God. David doesn't get himself caught up in things too big for him and things too lofty. God, I just want to do what you want me to do. My hope is in you. Even if those things are super impressive, David says, my hope is in the Lord. So let me ask a question this way. As you're listening in on this and maybe even reading through Psalm 131, ask God to show you an area of your life where you're pursuing things that He hasn't asked you to pursue, where you're pursuing something that God hasn't shown you, this is what you should be doing, but it's more of a lofty thing for yourself. It's a gaining ground for yourself. It's clout for you. It's the next step in whatever, but maybe God isn't calling you to that. Maybe God's just calling you to something a little bit different, to simple, faithful obedience. And if God would reveal to you when you pray, God, show me what it is that I'm focusing on that isn't you, when He shows it to you, when He reveals it to you, would you surrender it back to Him in obedience? Would you, like David, view the world with humble eyes, with unprideful, no pride in your heart and in your eyes? Would you look at the world that way and just focus on your next step of obedience and faithfulness to what God asks you to do? What next step do you need to take?